Hi, folks. Thanks for joining in. We're going to give it another minute and then we'll get started. All right, we'll get going here. Hi, folks. My name is Byron Kamenek, owner and manager of Jack Solar Garden and the director of the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center that is putting on these agrivoltaic webinars. They're free. We want people to learn more about how we can how we can incorporate agriculture ecosystem services within solar arrays. We've been working on this since 2020 when we were established here at Jack Solar Garden, helping to reach thousands of people every year, not just through webinars, but a variety of different things. Let's see, there we go. This is how we showcase it, from different types of events to having workshops on site. We have a lot of online materials. If you go to www.coagrivoltaic.org or just Google Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center, you'll find us. We try to put new information up there, new videos, new fact sheets, a variety of information so that folks can learn more about agrivoltaics even from home. If you're in the Colorado area, you can come out for tours and different events during our growing season, which is end of April through October. So we are presently closed. Please do not show up at my property. Come out, sign up in April and beyond. Um, as I mentioned, we have a number of different educational opportunities, not just for adults, but for kids. We have about 1,000 kids that come out to visit us, K through 12 classes. We oftentimes integrate solar companies and local policymakers into these educational opportunities where we've trained the kids about agrivoltaics, and then we have them provide presentations back to those that know most about it. We've held a variety of different events every season. Like the one in the top right, where we have different folks that come out during our season. We'll do a public event in May, one in July, another one in August or September, so that more community come out, understand that it's safe, that we can have people within a solar array without any issues. And part of agriculture within solar arrays is having people there. So it's important to showcase that people can be there safely. Uh, just on the topic of different seminars that we've had or webinars and seminars that we've had in the past, every 2 months we've done a webinar similar to the agrivoltaics O&M perspective that we did back in April here. We also had a in-person seminar series where we invited folks to come out to the Dairy Arts Center in Boulder or at the CSU campus, where folks could actually interact in person versus over this computer screen that we're talking through here. We're continuing to do this. Right now, we are putting on movie screenings of our new film, the Save the Farm, Save the Future. We were just at the Lyric in Fort Collins on Tuesday night with about 80 people plus a panel of speakers to talk to folks. We're looking to have showings of the movie in Denver as well as Greeley and potentially in Pueblo come springtime. Talking about agrivoltaics is really important for our communities because policymakers are making rules and regulations around it, whether they know much about it or not. So it's important for more community members to understand what is and what is not agrivoltaics and how we can do it in a better way for our future. So teaching our policymakers through different community events or through these online informationals or through what we do at Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center, where we actually go to different counties and set up meetings with planning commissioners, with county commissioners to talk to folks about what it looks like to plan, permit, and site agrivoltaic projects is important because there's money coming down the line from it, or actually, I guess in the next 2 years, less money in this direction. But when there is more leverage towards more solar development, more agriculture, at least our policymakers will be better equipped to figure out how to allow for it to be done in the best way possible. Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center has a variety of different resources, as I mentioned previously, that are online. We released our publication, the land use code guidance for deploying agrivoltaics in Colorado back in June. It's a document online that helps support local counties think about how they plan, permit, and site agrivoltaic projects. We also have a variety of fact sheets that are available to folks. One of our crowning things for 2026 is going to be our Colorado Agrivoltaic Conference. That will be February 19th and 20th. This is specifically for policymakers, for agricultural land stewardship organizations, and for solar companies. This is not open to the general public to come to. It is not open to students. However, those folks can sign up to be online participants and watch it, whereas the folks that are coming in person are more in those three categories I mentioned there. We are selling tickets at the moment, so if you're part of the solar industry and in the Denver area and want to participate, feel free to follow up with me, shoot a message, and I'll be able to provide you with a link to learn more about that. Today's webinar, we are talking about the 2024 recipients of Colorado Department of Agriculture's Agrivoltaics grants. These folks joining us from the Univa Energy Group, from Cloudbreak Energy, from Long Road, from Longboard Power, excuse me, and from Colorado State University. We'll share with you about their experiences and what they've learned from the research funding that they received from the Colorado Department of Agriculture. We also have with us Kristen Boysen, who will be our moderator and will help to transition in between our different speakers here. That I will be quiet from this point forward and pass it off to Kristen to be able to introduce our different speakers, and I'm sure she has something to share too about the Colorado Department of Agriculture and this agrivoltaics program. But thank you very much for joining. Here's the information about our nonprofit. If you're interested in following up, this is being recorded and it will be published on our website in the next few weeks. Thanks.
Thanks, Byron. I really appreciate it. And thanks for having me. It's so fun to moderate a panel of our all-star grantees. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kristen Boysen. I'm the Managing Director of the Colorado Department of Agriculture's Drought and Climate Resilience Office. Our office includes all of our energy work, including our agrivoltaics grant program, as well as our soil health program and our new agricultural stewardship tax credit program. So I get to do a lot of things kind of on the climate and drought gradient. It's very exciting. And our agrivoltaics program is one of our favorite and most popular programs. So thanks so much for our panelists for joining us today. They are really an all-star group that show off the many great programs or projects, excuse me, we have funded. Just a short background, our agrivoltaics program started in 2023 with some state legislation that created the program and funded it every year. In the last 3 years, we funded 18 projects with $1.3 million total. So not a ton of money for each project, but we've really gotten to see some great demonstration projects and some great innovative research come out of these programs. So it really speaks to the innovative Coloradans working on this project. I'm going to put in the chat our program website. So if you want to see the other projects that we have funded and the ones that are currently ongoing, take a look. Our annual grant cycle, the applications open in the spring, usually around April. Projects are funded in July and August, and then folks have a year to do their project. Thank you, Byron. So it's a quick turnaround, but if anyone here is interested in our program, stay tuned and look on this website in March, and there'll be information about our grant guidelines for the coming year. With that, I'm not going to waste any more time, and I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. We're going to start with Dr. Jen Busolo, who is an associate professor at Colorado State University. She runs the Green Roof and Urban Ag program, and her project, which was funded in 2024, installed an agrivoltaic panel at the CSU Spur campus in Denver. I bet it's going to be like the most visited agrivoltaic panel in the world. It's like right in the middle of this great educational campus where thousands of people will see it every year. And her team's going to use that panel to understand what crops benefit from the shade and moisture underneath solar panels. So I won't steal your thunder, Jen. Pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. First, I mean, thanks to Kristen and her team at CDA. They have really done an incredible job on a very short timeline with a very new program to manage these agrivoltaics grants programs. So, congratulations on that, especially 2 years of success so far. I want to also thank a couple of my other collaborators besides CDA. So, as Kristen mentioned, we're at Colorado State University Spur campus. That's downtown Denver, Colorado, where the stock show facility is, if you're familiar with that area. Our project was funded because of the potential for demonstration. We're also getting research out of this project as well. Solar was the company that did the installation for us as well. So they navigated all the challenges of working with multiple public institutions, which can be quite challenging. So first, I want to just mention you saw a picture earlier in Byron's slides of our somebody who probably needs no introduction, but our governor, Jared Polis. 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, Kristen and her team brought the governor to come at the CSU Spur campus to announce the first round of grantees. And so, because of that, they facilitated a little tour for the governor up on my rooftop agrivoltaics installation in the next building. And on the way up the elevator, he was so kind as to congratulate me for winning the grant. And I said, "Oh no, I'm sorry, Governor. Actually, I didn't win this year." And his very smooth response was, "Well, we can't give CSU all the money." So thankfully, I was lucky the next year. That was in 2024. And so I'm going to tell you about that project. But just to set it up a little bit, thankfully, we have a professional photographer on site at the CSU Spur campus. If you've not been there, I highly recommend you come. We've done a lot of research growing veg crops, high value fruits, and then even actually saffron, I'll mention towards the end, under solar panels. So here's our work. We have full sun control areas as well as under solar panels. And we've looked at all kinds of things from chili peppers to leafy greens. Here's one of our team members, Rebecca Buena, taking some chlorophyll data on our leafy greens from my graduate student Armando's master's work. Armando has stayed on my team for his PhD, and he's looking specifically at another high value crop, raspberries. And so we have initiated that research at Spur already. And that was the basis of our project when we put our proposal in to the Colorado Department of Agriculture. So some very good news. We have multiple grants pending at the more federal level, but we're expanding to Jack Solar Garden to do at-grade agrivoltaics in a field condition. So we're kind of looking all the way from the urban all the way to the rural elements of agrivoltaics. So here's a couple more pictures also from Armando. We actually have another site at the CSU Fort Collins campus where we're looking at semi-transparent solar panels. So I'm really getting excited about that possibility because it sort of benefits in terms of it's like a mini greenhouse and the plants really thrive, but we also generate energy at the same time. So when we submitted our proposal, it's been about, I guess, 18 months ago now is when we were submitting. My argument was, let's put a solar panel agrivoltaics demonstration and research plot on one of the most publicly visited land grant institution locations in the state of Colorado. And so here's my little site that we propose to put the solar panel array on. And there's this sad little peach tree that was there. Don't worry, we saved that peach tree. It got moved over into actually a little existing grove right on site. Our idea was to actually do a single pole mount solar panel installation. And the main reason for single pole is so that we could embed all of the wires and electrical elements into that main central pole and then be able to maximize our ground space underneath. So here's the finished product. It's beautiful. It was a long time coming. We had lots of red tape to get through. In order to get this installed in a public place with a different landowner, land user, and our our energy company as well. So thankfully that on-site photographer took some great pictures. Here's that little peach tree we moved. Thankfully, she's actually doing much better now because she has irrigation. She wasn't getting irrigation in the spot she was in before. So we've actually had a number of press opportunities already, even though it's only been installed for about 6 weeks. Thankfully, it's already getting its name out there. We have an additional informational sign in Spanish and English that's out there as well. So, because we had enough space under this 24 panel array, we're actually taking another project that's, believe it or not, also funded by the Colorado Department of Agriculture in the specialty crop block grant area. We're looking at saffron production because that's a very high value crop that does very well in our climate. So here we are installing under the existing solar panel arrays on the green roof. And then within weeks, so we installed in September, October, within weeks we had flowering, and we pluck with tweezers those tiny little female portions of those flowers, and that's the spice itself. So thankfully, we've had a wonderful crop already underneath the new CDA sponsored agrivoltaics installation at grade. And we're, believe it or not, actually working in another agrivoltaics installation. We have lots of sites for our research at the Denver Botanic Gardens Chatfield Farms new 5-acre array as well. Thankfully, we're deeply connected there. So it's the little orange portion of this plant. And this one is actually a double stigma. My graduate student, Reese, who's pictured here, is the one that took this picture. And so that happens sometimes. We'll get actually double the yield on a single flower. So thanks again to our partners and sponsors. And I will kick it back to Kristen.
Thanks, Jen. I really appreciate it. I forgot to mention at the top of the call, please put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end of our panel discussion. But thanks, Jen. That panel looks amazing. I saw it like a month ago and it already looks better. Yeah, wow. All right, next up, we have from Cloudbreak Energy, Bryson Doughton. Bryson is the Senior Project Development Associate at Cloudbreak Energy. Cloudbreak's project was also funded in 2024, and they partnered with a hay and alfalfa farmer in northeastern Colorado to try and figure out how to install agrivoltaics over an irrigated hay operation. I don't know, Bryson, if you're going to get into this, but Cloudbreak did, along with many of our grantees last year, have to deal with the new federal administration and the different tax credits and tariffs that came along with that. So I'll pass it over to Bryson.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. And just to echo what Jen said, a massive thank you to the CDA. This project is definitely dependent, especially the agrivoltaics aspects, on this grant. We are, as you mentioned, a little behind on what we were planning for this project, mostly due to these impacts at the federal level. I'm not going to dig into them too much in our presentation. I mostly just want to talk about what we're doing with this project, which is called the Darling Ranch Agrivoltaics Project, and what our path forward is for 2026. So quick about me. Again, my name is Bryson Doughton. I'm a senior project developer here at Cloudbreak Energy. I'm a fourth generation Coloradan, and I did both my undergrad and graduate degrees at CU Boulder. My master's degree was in the MENV program, so I'm sure there are a few attendees from that program on here. If anyone wants to reach out to me to discuss how we're doing this project or any other projects we have, especially on the agrivoltaics front, I'm really happy to chat, as this is something I'm very passionate about. A little bit about Cloudbreak. We were founded back in 2020 here in Colorado. We are a renewable energy developer focused on community and distributed solar, as well as battery energy storage projects. We're headquartered downtown in Boulder. And although we have a pretty wide range of projects across the country, the majority of our projects are here in my home state, Colorado, with over 75% of our projects being located here. Typically, our projects range anywhere from 5 acres to 2,000 acres in size, but our bread and butter is really about the 40 to 80 acre range, which is about 5 to 10 megawatts. For our projects in Colorado, we currently have projects with XL Energy as well as Black Hills Energy that we are actively developing. And across our team, we're a pretty small operation. We're just 13 people, and we have around 40 years of experience in project development, renewable energy, project management, and project finance. So although we're a small team, we're very mighty with what we're able to get done. Just to look at our impact across the country, like I said, we are primarily focused in Colorado, but we do have a lot of projects out on the West Coast as well in the Midwest and on the East Coast. So we really have a wide range of projects, and we're really considering different agrivoltaics options for all of these projects. So since this is a community solar project, I thought it'd be helpful to quickly go over how community solar works. The really great benefit about community solar is that people, customers of XL Energy or Black Hills Energy or whatever utility has the community solar project, they can get the benefits of renewable energy without having to pay for the upfront cost of having solar. Additionally, if your house is heavily shaded by trees or it isn't quite up to code to get solar panels installed, if you have any issues with your roof warranty, this is a great way to have renewable energy used on your electricity bill. So with this program, we sign a power purchase agreement with the utility. So we'll be listed on their website as a community solar garden you can subscribe to. Customers will still get their electricity bill from Excel, but they will sign on to a subscriber agreement with Cloudbreak Energy, and they'll be able to receive a deep discount on their electricity bill every month. Additionally, we sign a lease with landowners, or at times we will own the properties. For this project specifically, we are working with the landowner who is going to be the farmer for the project. So looking at this project specifically, this is our Darling Ranch project. This is about a 60-acre project. Like I mentioned earlier, 40 acres is about what you see for a 5 megawatt project. This is a 5 megawatt project, but it is going to take up roughly 60 acres of this land. This is going to be on single axis trackers with rows running north to south. So as the sun moves through the day, our panels are going to follow the sun and be able to generate more electricity versus a fixed tilt system. This project has had a lot of unique design aspects go into it, which have been very, very fun to think about and work with the farmers and work with our electrical engineers to really determine how we can make this work, because this is a really large implementation of an agrivoltaic site that has a lot of considerations to be able to use this land as farmable acreage. So one of the biggest impacts on this is row spacing. We've been working with the farmer to determine how wide do our panel rows need to be in order to drive the equipment down in between rows. What's the best spacing practice? Like, can we actually space this out as far as you would like it to be, or what do you need it to be? And so it's been a real balance there, and we've had several iterations of how we want this project to look. And a lot of that comes down into balancing what the solar project needs versus what we need on the farm. So it's been a very collaborative process with the landowner. Additional things we're doing on this, we are going to have underground wiring to make sure that all the farm equipment doesn't have any risk of catching any of our wires. We're not blocking any paths for the tractors to drive down the rows. We've also reduced our access road. Typically, access roads run towards the middle of the project. That's where your inverters and transformers are going to be. We've actually moved this all to the very edge of the leased area, just to minimize how much of an impact that'll have on the farmable acreage. And additionally, we've also increased the number of access points. When you're driving a lot of big farm equipment into a solar array, you want to make it easy to be able to get in and get out and minimize how much turnaround and how much risk you really can have by having tractors and semi-trucks drive in between solar panels, because there is a big risk of running into these things and causing both damage to our system and risking people, since this is a live electrical system. But the biggest thing from the CDA grant for us is this drip irrigation system. Currently, this farmland is using flood irrigation. And with this grant, we've been able to procure and design a drip irrigation system that's going to be running in between our panels, around our system, and avoid all of our electrical equipment. So this has been a big undertaking for our team, as well as some additional engineers who have helped us really design how this drip irrigation system needs to look. So that is something I'll dig into a little bit later. And the last big thing on this project is this is going to be a 100% low income project. So all the electricity generated from this project is going to go to low income customers in Xcel Energy's territory, whether through donations or deeply discounted electricity rates. Site plans aren't that fun to look at, but here is a general outlook of what our project looks like. As you can see, we have pretty long rows running north to south. This is flipped 90 degrees, so north is to the left of the screen. Our access road is over on the right. You can see it is shorter than what we typically would design for a solar project, as well as having our transformers and inverter pads right near that access road. Also a little tough to see, but we do have access gates on all four corners to ensure that all the farm equipment can move in and out easily with minimal impacts to the farmable acreage. So with the CDA grant, as I mentioned, we were able to purchase and design a drip irrigation system. This system is going to be running in between our rows and underneath our panels. And this created quite a bit of complexity with how we're actually designing this project, because the drip irrigation system needs to be spaced out 30 inches in between the rows of, in between each line of drip irrigation system. And this adds complexity to the actual construction of this project, because there's an order of operations we're going to need to do that will require coordination between the installation of the drip tape as well as the installation of the solar panels. So the first thing we're going to have to do is install all of the conduit for our electrical lines, and then we'll install the drip tape, and then we can start the actual solar panel installation. And that's because our conduit is going to be running deeper than the drip tape. So if we were to install the conduit and the electrical lines after the drip tape was installed, there's a risk of damaging the drip tape. And then we wouldn't really find that out until we get a really big wet spot in the middle of the field when the drip tape's running. So this has been an ongoing collaborative effort with the farmer and the engineers to determine exactly how do we minimize our impacts and minimize the risk to both damaging this drip tape, as well as making sure that we can effectively design and install our solar projects. So like I said, we've had a lot of iterations on this. On the left, you can see a few of the different site plan layouts where we've played with different row spacing, added big alleyways for turnarounds. And we really still are in the final stages of finalizing these designs with the landowner as well as with our engineers. So some of the big considerations for these designs are, like I mentioned, the feasibility of construction, making sure that we can do this in a way that isn't going to incur significant cost of construction, as well as not damage any of the farm equipment or not damage any of the solar panels while we're going through this simultaneous installation. Another thing is the ability to meet our production goals for the solar panels. We have an agreement signed with Xcel where we need to generate a certain amount of electricity. And as we space out our rows and move our inverters to one location that's on one end of the system, there are a lot of line losses that we need to consider. So it's taken a lot of engineering to determine what the ideal row spacing is, as well as a lot of work with the farmers to determine exactly what equipment and what spacing they need, not just for driving down the rows, but for turning around as well and making sure that this is going to be a usable space. Additionally, like I said, the spacing of the drip tape is really important because that needs to line up in these 30-inch rows that need to fit in between our solar panels and not have any poles driven down right on top of them or right next to them and risk nicking that hose. And finally, like balancing the cost of the cost and benefits of these designs, as well as the needs of the farms and the needs of the solar, has been one of the biggest things that we've had to really consider as we're designing this project, since it is such a large acreage and such a large project with so much solar and so much farmable land that we can actually find a way to collaborate. So it's been a very big balance and a lot of iterations getting this to a point where we're excited to start construction in the next year. Other considerations and lessons learned from this project in general is just the construction requirements and the considerable coordination that really goes into building an agrivoltaic site at this scale. There are also long-term and short-term contracts that need to be figured out pretty early as far as like who's going to be farming this land, who's going to be maintaining it. If we've signed on with the landowner, they may not want to be the ones in charge of farming it for the next 40 years, which is the length of our lease. They may only want to do a 5-year agreement. Additionally, there's a lot of construction diligence that goes into making sure this site is feasible for a solar project, period, but also an agrivoltaics project, and making sure that aligns with the ongoing farming operation. This is an active farm right now, so when we're trying to coordinate our geotechnical consultants to go out and bore big holes in the middle of the field, we have to really time that up with when is it okay to drive out onto this farmland? Is it right after they seeded? Is it right after they harvest? And really finding those timelines and making sure we're just being good partners for the farmer and making sure that we're not impacting their farming operation while we're designing this project. And the biggest thing I can really offer to anyone considering a project like this is having an open communication line as well as a lot of collaboration with the landowner and the farmers. These projects get really complicated. I've worked on a lot of farms, but I'm not a farmer. And so I don't know all the ins and outs of what their needs are. So making sure that their needs are met by this project as well as our needs are met is really important for the success of an agrivoltaics project of this size. Looking forward, Cloudbreak has a massive portfolio of projects, and almost every single one of our projects has some form of agrivoltaics on site, whether it's sheep grazing, pollinator habitats, plants planted underneath the arrays. Like, we're finding ways to get creative here and taking the lessons learned from this project and from the Colorado Agrivoltaics Learning Center, as well as some of the other resources out there to determine how we can get creative and make sure that we're being good partners and being good stewards of the land. Some of the big things we've accomplished as we've pushed forward on our agrivoltaics efforts is we did plant one of the largest pollinator habitats in the Rocky Mountain West through a partnership with the Audubon Society on one of our projects out in Weld County near Johnstown. We also partnered with the Master of the Environment program last year for a research project where they provided us best practices on agrivoltaics, as well as built out a tool for us to determine best crops and agrivoltaics approaches for targeted markets and very specific locations down to the soil type. So we're very thankful for the Master of the Environment's work on that. And then, like I mentioned, we just have a lot of projects. We are early in design, halfway into designs of figuring out how can we make agrivoltaics work here and what's the best use of this land and how do we consider the local farming communities. So with that, I do want to just thank everyone again. Please feel free to reach out if y'all have any questions about our project or subscribing to our systems. We're really excited to be working on this project and so thankful to CDA as well as the Colorado Agrivoltaics Learning Center for this opportunity to share. And I'll pass it back to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Bryson. And thanks for the questions in the chat. I promise we'll get to them at the end, although there is one I think will be pretty quick, Bryson, to you. And the question is, why did you choose to do drip irrigation on that Darling Ranch project?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because we are trying to drive the tractors down the rows, the farmer that we're working with preferred a drip irrigation system. He's worked with drip irrigation systems in the past. And since we are going to have these pretty wide swaths, we weren't sure about the feasibility of doing like an overhead spray. So that's something we did consider lightly, but because the farmer's comfort was kind of our top priority here and making sure it's a system he's familiar with, that was our path forward.
Thanks, Bryson. And yeah, kudos to the Cloudbreak team. Like Bryson said, they've been working very closely with the farmer and landowner, and he is a opinionated guy, as many farmers are. So I really appreciate that they're working together to make it work for both the solar developer and the farmer. It's a great case study. All right, next up we have Sam Gary from Uneva Energy. Sam is the lead on Uneva's Energy's project development. Uneva's project was funded in 2024 and wrapped up in June of 2025, and it really focused on the feasibility and economic viability of installing agrivoltaics in feedlots. Sam and his team talked to several different feedlots in northern Colorado to understand how the unique conditions of each operation would work with agrivoltaics. And then he also partnered with a CSU researcher to think about the animal welfare benefits. So this is very much in the research side of our program, although already has created a project pipeline. Some of the people he talked to have already reached out to me looking to actually install some agrivoltaics. So a great example. Sam, over to you.
Awesome. Now you guys can see and hear me. Thank you for the great introduction, Kristen. And yes, we did not do a demonstration project, so I'm a little light on some of the fun pictures, but and everybody gets really excited for an economic analysis, so we'll try to keep this at least a little bit fun. So let's see, where's my next slide? So as Kristen mentioned, we did collaborate with Dr. Lily Edwards Calloway at Colorado State University. She's a professor in the animal science department, and really her focus is especially on beef cattle, herd wellness, herd health, and I mean, I can't say enough good things about Lily in terms of her as a collaborator on this. I wish she could join us on this webinar, but one person I think is going to be enough for today. You guys got a pretty good introduction to community solar and solar development from Cloudbreak. UNEVA does very much the same thing. We are Colorado based, but we operate across the country and kind of fill that gap between there's no project at all, never been thought of, to essentially everything is ready to construct or has been constructed and is ready to operate. So that's coming up with the project idea. Really, a lot of our focus is around making sure that these things pencil economically, which is kind of the basis for this project. Getting all of our entitlements, utility permissions, designs, and getting these constructed and ready to go. You guys got a brief introduction on community solar. That's a lot of what we're focused on, which ships off the electrons onto the grid where they're purchased by ratepayers at a discount. We also do some projects with landowners where the electricity is used on site, which is the model that we used for our project here. Kind of the basis for this project is, as we have seen it, I think, many times in agrivoltaics projects, the agriculture ends up getting, some of the arrays can get in the way of kind of standard practices within agriculture, or at least the way that producers are used to operating. We also see higher implementation costs from a PV perspective. And the kind of genesis for this project was realizing that if we used the PV as shade structures on feed yard operations, both the PV could benefit from the existing energy infrastructure, which is a big cost for us, getting that energy off to the grid or to the end consumer, as well as benefiting herd health by shading the animals. And so we saw this as a sum is greater than, or excuse me, whole is greater than the sum of its parts type of situation or type of solution. And to our knowledge, especially when we began this, other than a couple small demonstration projects, we did not know of anybody that had done a full economic analysis on what this would actually look like to implement, which, of course, if you are a producer, you are focused on making money at the end of the day. And you need to understand, if you undertake a project like this, is this going to help your operation? Is this going to be helpful to the bottom line? Is this going to be helpful to your animals? And so our goal here was to understand, first of all, what it would look like if you did install a project like this, as well as try to quantify. And Lily did a great job digging into a lot of the research and compiling a lot of research, as well as leveraging some of our economic analysis tools to understand what the value was for shading of animals on a feed yard. I think in my experience, the beef industry is a little bit behind the dairy industry in this respect. A lot of major dairies here in Colorado, you'll see the animals are shaded or they're in cross-fed barns. To my knowledge, there's not a major beef feed yard operation in Colorado that has shade to any scale or extent. And so we wanted to make sure that we could quantify that for producers to help make the case that this was a good idea. You can see our solution here. In order to make this repeatable and scalable, which of course to us as a developer is important, and not have to use custom solutions. Our proposed solution, and this is what we priced off of, was this empty solar 12-foot rack. And you can see here, this is being used as a carport. Of course, in our project, we were using this to shade cattle. And so you can replace this truck with some animals. As noted, focused on project economics. Another thing that we found to be very important was if you want to get people to adopt these types of solutions, we think that the operation needs to come first. And you just cannot expect a producer to change the way they're going to operate full scale by implementing something like this. I think that we found a lot of friction, and we did try to do some fairly extensive interviews with all of our subjects, all of our research subjects, on what are your guys' concerns? Why haven't you implemented shade before? Why haven't you tried something like this before? And I think we got a lot of great opinions, and actually found that so long as you got around some of their operational constraints, like being able to operate their feed bunks appropriately, scrape pens, clean pens, there was a lot of openness to this. Previous attempts at shading animals, etc., they felt that it got in the way of their operation and was making things run more slowly, or they had concerns about that. And I think that was a positive outcome from our research. You can see we ended up interviewing and going out and meeting with and running economic analyses on 4 different operations. We tried to capture a good geographic spread in terms of going from the North Front Range, Southeastern Plains, Northeastern Plains, and then even got an operation on the Western Slope. Also captured vastly different sizes of operations. Our yard on the Western Slope had only about 50 animals. In contrast, our Southeastern Plains operation was about 70,000 at the time that we were there. Obviously, this comes with vastly different energy consumption on site, anything from running a large grain mill to just a few pumps, lights, machine shop, etc. We also captured different utility jurisdictions, which actually ends up becoming very, very important. One of these was in Excel territory, which is our major investor-owned utility here in Colorado. We also captured various different co-ops that all have different rules around how you can use and charge for energy, and that makes a huge difference in economics from project to project. And so we felt that that was very valuable and gave us some good insights. Cutting to the chase here and getting to the more interesting stuff, we ended up running several different sensitivities. So we took a base case on what this would look like kind of under current conditions, as well as if you were to change a couple key variables. One was grant funding. If you could get a demonstration grant like the CDA grant, we found that the projects that obviously help project economics. Another one was the cost of electricity, and that's what I'm focused on here. We also use several different metrics. What I'm showing here is the internal rate of return, which is what we as developers tend to focus on. I know that producers tend to be more focused on payback periods. So that was also incorporated in our analysis, but I think the IRR tells a very interesting picture here, which is that these projects don't quite pencil under current conditions. That's the blue bar that you're seeing on the left. They're close, but they're not quite there. The current conditions that we're using is the historical cost of energy increases in the state, which is about 2% year over year. We also modeled in a 5% escalation case, which is the green bars or the olive bars that you're seeing on the right, which all of a sudden makes the project economics look a lot better. 5% is what we used, but on some of the energy escalation curves that I've seen that we get from consultants, 5% is actually a bit conservative. So if you're looking at increasing energy prices, which we as ratepayers all know are coming, we've seen them, and we expect them to continue into the future, we're seeing that these projects get closer and closer to being very, very financially feasible. You can also see our 2 benchmarks here. The blue line that's crossing there at about 7.5 So that's 7.5% IRR is what we typically consider to be an economically viable project. But we set a higher threshold here at 10%, and that's the orange line, which we think, in order for somebody to undertake a novel implementation method, we think that they need to be incentivized to do that. And so we set a threshold that we consider these projects would be viable at 10% IRR, which we consider to be a very profitable project. And so you can see that we're really approaching that. And I think, especially as we move down the road a couple of years and energy continues to go up, these projects are going to do nothing but get more profitable and more viable for operations. We also, one thing that, I know we were a little bit limited by being in Colorado because we had a lot of feedback from our producers, especially those that had operations in eastern Nebraska and Kansas that are more susceptible to these heat stress events that really want shade. And they said, well, I don't really want you to study my operation in Colorado. I want you to go check out eastern Nebraska, where I already am interested in putting in shade, or Kansas, where there was a large heat stress event that resulted in the deaths of a lot of cattle. This was a couple of years ago. And so I think in other locations, we could see a lot more viability in these. We're just fortunate in Colorado. We have a pretty temperate climate, and it only gets hot for a handful of days at a time during the summer. As noted, we also tried to quantify the value of shade. We did find it to be substantial. This was anywhere from about six figures on our larger operations to, several tens of thousands of dollars on some of the smaller operations. And so we're hopeful that, we believe and Lily believes that that was kind of one of the first attempts at trying to quantify that value of shade to the animals. And so we're hopeful that that'll inform some further investigation in that domain as well. Moving on to some other observations that we had, I was actually shocked by how few panels we needed to power these operations. And so I think if you have a better method of potentially making more money, it becomes, and I'm happy to answer more questions about this, but it becomes less profitable as you export energy onto the grid and sell it at wholesale rates. You can get a much better return by using that energy on site. But we actually found that you needed fewer panels than we had originally expected. And so you kind of get to pick and choose where you want to put those on the most vulnerable animals. We also recognized, as noted, the operational constraints on these operations are considerable and definitely a concern to producers. And so I think that was some very valuable information. The cost of installing these is a lot higher than a standard ground-mounted array. We found that to be almost double. And so I think that's something, as we improve designs or potentially look at other methodologies, that we can get into. And then I also noted that the producers were very interested. And I think under the right economic conditions, especially as we move forward, we might see some implementation of something like this. In terms of moving on to additional research, we do have a draft ready that we're going to submit. So this will be published research in the Applied Animal Science Journal. We've also had some conversations. We had some people reach out from Australia that I think is ahead of the curve, at least compared to the United States, on both shading animals as well as solar implementation. So those have been very interesting conversations. And then I actually, even this past week, had a demonstration project reach out to me with a potentially better and cheaper racking solution. So looking forward to continuing those conversations as well. With that, make sure you guys have my contact information. If anybody has questions or wants a copy of our paper, please feel free to reach out, and look forward to chatting with you. Kristen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Sam. A quick question for you, maybe not too so quick, but I think we can tackle it right now. Did your economics study focus only on the energy, or did you also incorporate the animal life loss and the cost of that?
Yeah, we did incorporate that, and we tried to be very conservative with those numbers because we didn't want to overstate them. If you look in the paper, there is a kind of a methodology on how we did that. Death loss ends up being somewhat of an insignificant factor, but the loss in growth in gain that the cattle can make when they're under heat stress, they end up performing a lot more poorly, and that was where a lot of the value came from. But yes, that was incorporated in the value of these systems.
Nice, thank you. And thanks for the great questions, everyone. Keep coming in and we'll tackle them at the end. But just to make sure we have enough time, I want to give it up for our next panelist. Tibor Hegedus was one of our first grantees and really one of our all-star grantees. He was funded in 2023. Um, he's the principal at Longboard Power, and Longboard installed an innovative agrivoltaic shelter belt, which is a windbreak on the edge of an eastern Colorado dryland farm. Tibor measured, working with researchers, but as far as I can tell, it was mostly him, measured the soil moisture and other environmental impacts of having that shelter belt on the edge of the field, and has some great results. And now that the shelter belt's installed, he continues to do really interesting research out there. So, Tibor, I'll pass it over to you.
Right. Okay, thanks, Kristen. Let me just get my screen up here. Everybody got that? All right.
Not yet.
Not yet. Hold on. Let's see. Did it share?
It doesn't look like it's sharing.
I'm going to go here. I just had it.
There we go.
Okay. Times charm. Okay. Just pull it up
It
here.
is sharing
Here we
the
go.
whole PowerPoint.
Back up here.
There you go. Got it.
Okay. Just minimize that. Okay, so as Kristen mentioned, Longboard Power applied for a grant with the CDA for a specifically designed shelter belt. As you can see in this picture to the right, wouldn't have done it without some team members that I need to highlight here, and that's Roy Flatscraft from PFC Farms out in Northeast Colorado. And then we also worked with Dr. Jeff Strock out of the University of Minnesota for soil sample and climatology type of analysis from our data. So kind of starting out, and as Kristen kind of mentioned, you hear shelter belt. It's basically windbreak, kind of used interchangeably. Just a quick background, back after the Dust Bowl, shelter belts were actually really a focus of the federal government. They funded a lot of trees that were put in the Great Plains. Almost 220 million trees were planted from like 1930s to 1940s. You probably still see some of them out there, but in essence, they act to provide a protective barrier for farmers to mainly from soil erosion, but just other impacts from wind. And so we approached CDA with our concept, which is basically, what if we moved away from trees? Because obviously trees and crops both compete for soil nutrients and water as well, which is becoming more and more precious in definitely eastern Colorado and other parts of the United States. So we wanted to see if we did a solar version of an aggregate or of a shelter belt, what that actually impacted in terms of microclimates, crop responses, and then ultimately too just what the energy production looked like. The picture on the left, that's actually from the 1940s for a promotion from the federal government to plant trees in the plains. So just a quick background. How did this idea kind of come about? So it started out first as a solar snow fence, and for those that have been traveling around and go up into the mountains, you probably see what's termed a Wyoming snow fence. We basically combine the two ideas, like our peanut butter and chocolate idea here, if you will, for the Wyoming snow fence with a single axis solar tracker to get a solar snow fence. We made some modifications to it to make it more adaptable for agriculture use, and that's what we've termed the dynamic agrivoltaic shelter belt, which is a picture on the bottom there. And that's what we installed, which we'll get to here in a minute. Just some of the functionality that goes with this, 180 degrees, capable as far as tracking and alignment. Typically for single axis trackers, you'll see those lined up north to south because they're going to track the sun from east to west. We do have the capability and functionality to align that from north to south to east or west and anything in between, and it'll still be able to track the sun depending on that specific alignment. We do have sensors that automatically detect if we're having snow or wind conditions. It'll actually move the tracker into a nearly full vertical position, and in snow events, it actually helps kind of capture some more snow. Without getting too into the details, you're kind of altering the surface area and volume just by storing snow behind the snow fence. During high wind events, obviously, it's meant to mitigate the impacts of wind, and that's kind of what our focus has been here. The other part here, too, is as we're putting it out in the eastern plains, That area gets beat up, I will say, with a strong underline to that, with some massive storms. And so we needed to make a very robust system, both in terms of wind, but also hail. The bottom picture in the middle to the right, that's actually our some of our panels, and that this is from this past September. Baseball-sized hail ran through that farm, and so you can see it does put some dents in the system, but it didn't break the system. And then ultimately, too, the dynamic piece for our portion, besides just changing based off of weather conditions, is that the system can actually accommodate based off of what farming equipment is kind of coming through. As you can see here, there's an air seeder. So we have the system put in a horizontal position. It's a picture on the bottom right, just to allow the farmer to maximize the use of land for their operations, and obviously not get in the way of the type of equipment. I mean, the equipment is pretty massive right there. The air seeder, it's probably about 35 feet, I think, in width, and then the height of that system probably gets up to, I would probably put it at like 15 or 16 feet when you're looking at the top of the seed tank there. As I mentioned, our partner is for this project is PFC Farms, located up in the northeast corner of the state. That whole area is characterized as a semi-arid high plains. They basically get about 16 inches of rain per year, kind of give or take. PFC Farms is about 2,000 acres. It's all dry land operation. They're also regenerative and no-till practice, and they rotate about 18 different crops through their farm at any given year. A lot on this slide, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. But basically, just as a kind of the setup, the blue line, if you see on the far right, that is the actual agrivoltaic shelter belt. The sensors that we put in are going to be downwind of the system. We had one sensor that's also put upwind of the system, and then just like any other research, you're going to have a control which is located to the west immediately of that shelter belt. So what's interesting here is, as I mentioned before, we have a single axis tracker, but we're actually placing it in an east and west type of configuration. So it's not maximizing its tracking capability for the sun per se, but it's really meant more for mitigating the wind. If you look at the top right of this picture, you actually have the wind rose, which dictates, if you will, on an annual basis where the wind is coming out of and the strength of that wind. So during the growing season and up to harvest, the wind is actually pretty prevalent, and it's coming out of the southeast. And then during the wintertime, for those that are in Colorado probably know this already, but it's mainly out of the north and northwest, and you get a lot of snow systems that kind of roll through that way too. We were measuring soil moisture down at 4 different depths, down to 60 centimeters, and then above ground we had a adjustable tripod, so we're kind of getting crop level or canopy level measurements for humidity, temperature, airspeed, wind speed, and direction. So what did it come down to? So this is a picture of downwind, if you will, of the agrivoltaic shelter belt in a wind blocking position. Over the course of that harvest season, or that season in 2024, the different sensors that we had placed downwind of the structure, you could see the amount of reduction in the wind speed. So 25 feet behind the system, you got nearly half the wind speed decreased. And then, out to 75 feet, you're still getting pretty significant reductions in wind speed. And then down to about 125 feet, you still get some marginal decreases. Part of this is actually related just to the length of that agrivoltaic shelter belt. It's about 100 linear feet. And the type of data that we used was really actually meant more for the wind as it hit almost near perpendicular to that structure, just to see what the wind was doing behind it. And I guess that's probably the bigger part here that I want to emphasize is that some of the other projects that you look at with agrivoltaics, that kind of emphasize shading effects on crops. This actual research had nothing to do with shading effects. It's all about wind-induced desiccation, or what happens when the wind blows across crops, and trying to see what the crop response is and how the agrivoltaic shelter belt can actually add some benefit. So wind speeds, pretty big reductions. Look at temperature. Interesting that there's a slight increase as you move downwind of the shelter belt up to about a certain point, and then it kind of transitions over to a slight drop in air temperature. Wind has a cooling effect, but also has a drying effect, and so we're trying to find some sort of balance, if you will, with what is the right approach in terms of you don't want to have the temperature increase too dramatically, because then all of a sudden then the crops kind of get in a position where they're going to start drawing more water out of the ground just to stay alive. And so the analysis here is just kind of looking at what we refer to as porosity of the actual structure itself. Humidity kind of follows in line with what you saw with air temperature, that we do see a slight bump in humidity levels behind the system, and then that kind of drops off again once you kind of taper off to about 125 feet or so from the system. Just as a point of reference, that shelter belt has about, when it's in the vertical position, is about 12 feet in height. Okay, so we looked at some published research with our data that we collected, and actually kind of follows along with what we saw at the site. There are pretty rapid changes in wind speed downwind of the shelter belt. But interestingly enough, there's an increase in air temperature and humidity up to a certain point, and then it kind of, as I mentioned, kind of drops off. And so the research that we looked at in our data kind of supports that. There's really not a linear relationship in terms of what that temperature is doing or what the wind speed is doing. Actually, it varies quite a bit, and there's a pretty significant curve, at least for the wind speed reduction. The data on this slide is actually reflective of our system, which is about 50% porosity system. If you looked at increasing or decreasing, I should say, the porosity, so the question might be, well, why not put in full-size panels? What ends up happening is that if you look at the curve for the wind speed reduction, it actually gets really short. I mean, it gets down really quickly, but then the wind actually gets back up to its original speed at a lot shorter distance. Related temperature actually will increase pretty significantly on that slide, or excuse me, on this area right behind the shelter belt, and then it'll drop back off pretty quickly, and then we'll get back to the upwind profiles that we're approaching that. So there are the different areas, if you will, that kind of characterize the wind capabilities or the characteristics as it approaches this shelter belt. But in essence, what we found in the research that we looked at, that 50% porosity actually provides the most benefit. And I think the other part that plays into that, and this is with the farming operations, is that we're able to actually space our rows out a lot wider. We're looking at anywhere from 200 plus feet between rows. There are some for the farming operations that are out in eastern Colorado. There's some spraying units that are 190 feet in width, and so just being able to accommodate pretty massive pieces of equipment with still being able to generate electricity and also provide, at the end of the day, a benefit. So that's kind of what we're coming to next, which is probably like what everybody's most interested in, is what is the benefit of this shelter belt and what is it doing? So for that season, millet was grown downwind. What we saw was that the millet, actually, the yields were about the same between the control and the test fields. But as we analyzed the soil moisture sensors, we realized that the millet that was grown downwind of the shelter belt actually used 30% less water. So it drew 30% less water out of the ground, but you still achieve the same amount of yield results as a control. So in essence, you've improved the water use efficiency of the crop downwind of the system compared to control, which in dryland agriculture, that actually goes a really long way. And so the other thing that we wanted to make sure is that, well, are we changing any profiles within the crop itself in terms of nutrient values or anything that is the economic value, if you will, of the crop? What we did find is that micronutrient values were actually a lot higher in the downwind millet that was grown versus the control. So that was the first round of crops that were grown, and so we kind of self-funded the next round, if you will, of analysis, which was this past year. Camelina, excuse me, which is a oil crop or oil seed crop used for anything from I guess synthetic, no, not synthetic, but diesel and aviation fuel related to agricultural production. So what we found, at least in this go round, which is this past harvest season, is that we actually had a 3 times better yield on the downwind camelina versus our control. And you can kind of see that from this picture, is that it's a pretty, you kind of have to look a little bit, but the wind plume, if you want to call it that, is pretty easily characterized as you look downwind of this system from what you see from the picture. And then in the background is actually, the rest of the field, where you can kind of see splotches of stands that really didn't take, or failed stands, if you will. So we had 3 times the yield, but the camelina from both the control and downwind use the same amount of water. So again, we're kind of getting back to, from a field level perspective, the water use efficiency has benefited. In analyzing the crop as well, the oil content was about the same between the control and the downwind camelina. So, no changes, if you will, in terms of the economic value of that crop. So coming into the next season, we're looking at putting in sorghum, or at least the farmers opted for sorghum in that field, which is actually a pretty good pick. Kind of discussed it with Roy at the farm. What we're looking at analyzing, because if you go back to some of those other slides, we're affecting the wind, but the humidity and the temperature, although there's some changes there, that really doesn't seem like it accounts for the massive changes in the water use efficiency between the control and the downwind crop. So what we analyzed and what we're thinking is happening is there's a lot more going on in terms of, besides preventing dry air advection and the wind drying out the crops, is that at certain times of the year, especially in the spring, before you get the crop coming up and seeding, is that there's a lot of open dirt. And so as these fronts come through, or as these storms roll through, there's a lot of debris that's being pushed around, and probably getting a lot of leaf abrasion and tear, which, the plant by itself, it's going to use stomatal conductance to kind of regulate water going in and out of the plant in the root system. But once a leaf starts to tear, or if there are abrasions on that leaf, it loses a lot of control in terms of the water that's leaving the plant. And so I think, that's kind of the other part that we want to analyze to see, is that what is the actual benefit from the wind reduction, and is it more related to actual leaf abrasion and tearing versus just changing the humidity values, if you will, downwind of the crop. And so it says to our conclusions and observations, which at the end also raise more questions, which we know we're changing the wind speed pretty significantly, but the changes in temperature, humidity are less so. At the end, we know there's pretty positive impact on field level water use efficiency, and we're reducing the amount of drying that's coming from the wind on the crops. But as I mentioned, probably need to study a little more whether leaf abrasion and tear is a bigger factor in terms of protecting the crop. The other part too is just when there isn't crop there, what's going on with the soil. If we're protecting the wind from kind of blowing off some of the top levels of the soil or topsoil, the benefit obviously is pretty important for the farmer. But then also just retaining some of the additional moisture in the soil, is that aiding in additional microbial activity that benefits the plants and increases nutrient availability. Those are things that still need to be studied. We didn't have obviously the resources to kind of keep reaching and looking at that, but we wouldn't have been able to do this without a CDA grant, because it kind of just ended up being an idea that was looking for a place to demonstrate. And so the CDA grant actually gave us that capability. And that is it. I will stop sharing and I'll hand it back over to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Tibor. A couple of questions about your shelter belt. I know you have data on energy production. Can you talk a little bit about how much energy you produced and what it was, like where it went? And then also, do you have a sense of cost per energy of like install and construction and all that, and how that compares to traditional panel?
Yeah. So first question I think was how much energy it produces. So 100 linear feet of our system is rated at about 8 kilowatts. And so depending on the orientation. So in the orientation here at PFC Farms, it's east-west. So we were averaging probably around 11,000 kilowatt hours a year in terms of generation. As far as the uses, and this is probably the bigger part that I would say, and this might go to some other questions, but a lot of these farms aren't located right next to transmission lines and probably don't benefit from some of the PPAs that might be available through some of the utilities, or they're probably located in areas where the utility is not so receptive for going out for power purchase agreements with renewables. So we've actually spent a lot of more time in terms of looking at alternative options for farms that can benefit from this system, but also use the power. And so that encompasses everything from on-farm electrification capabilities to it's not ready for prime time yet, but we'll probably have something out here in a little bit, but more remote data processing capabilities that obviously funding the next economic cycle here with AI and data centers kind of popping up. There's actually quite a bit of capability that we demonstrated in conjunction with this grant while we were doing this project, and kind of leads us to that. As far as the cost of the system, this is a one-off because it was a prototype. We've definitely been able to bring down the cost just based off of what we've learned from the field. But I would say also too, and just kind of quickly from my background, I was in the wind industry and obviously now more in solar, but to a certain extent, the wind industry for a while, there's a quick race to get to the bottom, if you will, in terms of the amount that it costs to generate power. And as you're probably going to be seeing or have been seeing, it actually comes at the expense of reliability of equipment and the longevity of equipment in the field. And so, we're looking at these systems that are being put into fields that have, extremely or have extreme environments in terms of the wind and, severe storms. And so we actually build a pretty beefy system. So the price is going to be a little higher, but it's intended to last for a long time. And so price is coming down, but if you need more details, I would encourage those that are interested, you could just email me and I can start that discussion.
Thanks, Tibor.
Mm-hmm.
There was one question that was meant for Sam, but I think it is a good question for all panelists, which is, what do you think is the scalability of your project? Sam, specifically around, you talked about some of the scalability issues with agrivoltaics over feedlots, but kind of thinking broadly nationwide. We'll start with Sam, and then we can maybe talk to the other panelists too.
Yeah. I think currently it's just producer interest and openness is a big thing that I think we will always have a challenge with. I think you have to have producers that are both interested in something like this and open to, adjusting what they're used to doing. In terms of, economics, as noted, I think we're getting there. But I think really just that, thought of, hey, we're going to do something a little bit different here is something that's got to, you've got to get through somebody that's already got 10,000 things on their to-do list and make sure that this is a high value opportunity for them.
Thanks, Sam. Jen, you want to go next?
Yeah, happy to. So in our work, we work mostly on high value crops that are, relatively small in terms of acreage. And then it's between urban and sort of rural. So like we have quite a span. But to me, that's actually one of the easier points of entry, I feel like, for agrivoltaics. Even though it is a higher cost per unit, the payoff, I think, still comes faster because we are working on high value crops. There's also lots of labor, so don't get me wrong, but I think there's lots of interest. In fact, I'm getting a lot of interest from urban producers, just because most of them with these high value crops need some shade for a lot of their products. And to me, weather protection is one of the best horticultural uses for agrivoltaics.
Tibor, you want to go next? How many agrivoltaic shelter belts should we see?
How many more?
Yeah.
I'm open a lot more. So right now what we're doing actually is looking at expanding onto the PFC farms as far as the linear length, but also intra-row analysis of what's going on. We know we're affecting the wind, but then once you put a series of these in on a farm, what exactly is going to go on with the microclimates. And so these are available. I would say, just from the perspective of a small business based in Colorado, that we have had interest globally, I would say, on our product, but in practicality, I would say our focus is probably going to be more on Colorado and its adjoining states. And really, and this is probably the bigger part too, is that there's a lot, as you probably have seen, there's a lot of different flavors and styles of agrivoltaics. Climate and crop are the biggest factors, and so you should base your design off of that, and not necessarily I just want to put up solar panels and see what happens. There's a you can maximize the benefit for your operation if you spend a little more time analyzing the right agrivoltaic system for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's very right. It really depends on each operation. Bryson, you talked about this a little bit in your presentation, but do you want to talk about Cloudbreak's vision for agrivoltaics and community solar and kind of all the projects you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this project is kind of a unique one for us because it's really hard to find, a landowner that wants to use their land as an active farm and a solar project. So I think that'll be one of the biggest limiting factors, as well as just making sure you're able to secure the funding, because projects at this scale are just more expensive in a dollar per watt perspective for actual design and implementation. So that and making sure you have water rights and passionate people are going to be the biggest limiting factors. For Cloudbreak as a whole, though, we are really looking at different ways we can do agrivoltaics, and whether it's a smaller scale system or just a different approach besides just a large hay field, we're definitely getting creative as we push into new projects.
Thanks, Bryson. There's a question for me, so I'm going to selfishly take it. The question is, what portion of agrivoltaics funding should go to research versus food production? And I'm assuming, Sam, you mean kind of like demonstration of agrivoltaics while growing food. And that's a great question. We think about this question every grant round that we have. Our grant funds both things. One of the things when an early study found, American Farmland Trust was a grantee in 2023, and they did a big survey of Colorado producers, and Colorado producers really wanted to see demonstration of agrivoltaics, which makes sense. You kind of have to see it to believe it. So we really do try and prioritize projects that show innovative uses of solar integrating with food production. But because of how our grant is designed, it's very hard to fund big projects because it's a very fast grant timeline. So we're a little bit constrained in that way. That being said, there's also a lot of questions from farmers around what are the benefits of agrivoltaics? Will it work for my crop type? What does it look like with my irrigation setup? So those kind of research questions are also important. Sam did a livestock one, and we had like a lot of questions, or we continue to have a lot of questions around cattle and agrivoltaics. So that was one of the reasons Sam's project was awarded, is it really targeted something we heard from our Colorado producers. So long story short, we would love to fund projects like actually many, all except Sam, I guess. The 3 demonstration projects here today do demonstration and research, which is awesome. And may we have all unicorn projects like this moving forward. But Sam's project was research that now is leading to implementation, so also very cool. All to say, we like demonstration projects. Probably the majority of funding should go to showing how this works on land and demonstrating it to farmers. And then the research that we do fund, we really try and fund research that has a targeted producer audience. We try not to fund research that seems like pretty academic and ethereal, and instead really targeted towards the questions that our constituents are asking. And we're very lucky in the state to have good research partners that also have those goals. So that's my answer. And I don't know if any of the panelists have any thoughts about the kind of the trade-off between research and demonstration.
I would just say that it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, obviously, there's a lot that can be answered after you have put up a project to kind of, if you will, kind of fine tune what's happening with crops. So, um, yeah, that would be my response.
Thanks, Timur.
Kristen, I was just going to say, I'm extremely impressed by people that did demonstration projects. One of the reasons why we tailored ours was because we looked at a 12-month funding cycle. And then by the time you actually get your budgets in, I mean, it effectively looks a little bit more like a 9-month funding cycle. And for us to do any sort of project at scale, I was thinking that's going to be an incredibly tight timeline. And then actually gathering data after that. I'm just very impressed with you guys that got those demonstration projects done in that time frame.
It's a real hurdle. You got all of our grantees are very impressive. There's a question for you, Sam, about the operational costs and what were the key elements that doubled those in your economic analysis?
Awesome. Yeah. And I may have misspoken. It was actually the capital expenditure that was about twice as expensive. Steel. It's really just a lot of steel cost. By the time you throw panels up 12 feet in the air, you have to deal with, especially in northern Colorado, a lot of wind loads that you don't see for shorter panels, which has corresponding, um, you know, deep pile depths. You need to pour a lot more concrete. And then there's, especially if you're spreading shade structures out among a feed yard to cover, for example, hospital pens, as opposed to just putting them as close to the transformer as possible, you end up with a lot more conduit costs and trenching costs that just, you're not able to grab those kind of efficiencies by putting a lot of panels low and close together that you can on a standard ground mount array.
Thanks, Sam. Question for all our panelists, because you all got this state funding, I'd love to hear kind of what were the opportunities and also barriers of using government funds for your projects. Maybe Sam, we'll start with you.
Cool. I mean, I thought it was great. I love that we got to collaborate with CSU. That was a huge part of our project. I'm from Colorado. We're Colorado based, so I love doing the research in Colorado. But I did note that our producer interest was really directed to places where it's more hot and humid. And, because it's a CDA project, the research takes place in Colorado. So I think that was one small limitation that we did see. Otherwise, working with CDA is great. I mean, Kristen and her team really kicked ass. So hats off on that.
You guys don't have to flatter me, it's fine. Timur, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, just from a small business perspective, working with CDA, just the ability to kind of either pick up the phone or send an email and get a pretty quick response in terms of kind of going through the grant process, and also post award, getting some guidance and direction. Obviously, I would say it was very easy to work with the CDA when it came to that. I think the other part, at least from interest on our system, is that water scarcity is actually kind of driving a lot of what is at least for Colorado in the West, the interest in agrivoltaics and what it can do. Because at the end of the day, you're going to need water one way or another if you're going to grow something. And so, and if it's not in the ground, or if you're trying to find ways to keep it in the ground, that's probably one of the better selling points, if you will, for agrivoltaics. And so that's more from crop perspective. Obviously, I'll leave it up to Sam to kind of talk more about the options when it comes to cattle and livestock options.
Thanks, Timur. Jen, any thoughts on pros and cons of state funding?
State funding is fantastic, in my opinion, because it's secure, localized, all of that. So actually, Colorado State University was probably harder to work with than CDA was on getting these things going. So for us, it's wonderful. And in fact, it opened a couple of doors for us because it was a state partnership with another state institution. It helped get through some of the sort of typical challenges that come up. And I'm specifically talking like internally at CSU and with the landowner, which is the National Western Stock Show facility. And even with Excel as the power authority in that area. So actually, it was mostly good. I think it was mostly just red tape from CSU's side that slowed us down. It was a tight timeline, like Sam said, for us too, just because there's so many folks that need to sign off on arrangements like this. And so we actually did install after the deadline, but we purchased everything prior to the deadline. So we were able to install within weeks after.
Thanks, Jen. Bryson,
Yeah.
will you close us out with any state funding issues?
Definitely. Well, I think the pros first. It was really great work with CDA. Obviously, there's been a lot happening in the solar industry, and CDA was really helpful to make sure we kept this moving forward. There were definitely some times when we weren't positive we were going to be able to make this project work, and having this funding and be able to design it the way we were able to is in a large part due to this funding, and be able to secure the strip tape and get creative with how we can push this project forward. I think just to echo Sam's sentiment on the timelines, they're really tough for a large scale development like ours. It's a several year process to get a project from a lease signed all the way to construction. So it's tough to get that to time up with the 1 year requirement for this. But otherwise, I think it was a really, really great process, and your team was extremely responsive, and we're just very thankful.
Well, thanks, Bryson. And yeah, we're very lucky in Colorado that our senators and governor are very supportive of renewable energy and supporting agriculture. I didn't mean to make this breaking news. Oh, Sam, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one more thing, Kristen, because if you recall, we actually submitted a larger scope project with a larger budget, and you called me up and said, "Hey, we want to fund this, but we can't fund it at that dollar amount." And I thought CDA was excellent at working with us on changing our scope and changing our budget to something that they could approve. So if anybody in the audience is thinking of submitting for this, know that Kristen and her team are great about hey, we can't give you that, but we can give you this, and then you can shape a project together, which I thought was a huge, huge advantage of working with you guys.
I appreciate that feedback, actually, Sam. I never know if it's a good idea to ask people to reduce their budget, often significantly. So I'm glad it worked out for you all. And I didn't mean to make this breaking news, but I had to check with our ledge team. In the governor's budget this year, which would go into effect next year, that our spending authority for this grant would be 2 years instead of 1 year. So we could fund projects that would take 2 years instead of just one. So a year and a half instead of 9 months, effectively. So if that budget goes through, that's a great news for our program. It's not more money, but more time to spend the money, which would be a big game changer for our grantees. Not final yet. Well, thank you all so much for attending our call. Thank you, panelists. It's always great to hear about the great work that's happening on the ground, and I'll pass it back to Byron and Calc. Thanks so much for putting on this webinar, Byron.
Thanks for being the moderator, Kristen. It takes a little effort off my side. And thanks, Sam, Bryce, and Jen, and Tibor, for taking your time to share about your experiences with the CDA grant. I know I learned something. I hope our attendees learned something too. This is being recorded, and it will be up on our website, coagrivoltaic.org, here in about 2 weeks. So you can look for it there if you need to share it with others that are interested. But thank you all very much for your time. Be well.